Hello, Minnesota. Welcome back. This is the Tony Hernandez Show. I'm your host, Tony Hernandez. I'm really excited about the show that we have today. We are going to be bringing on a Minnesota State House of Representatives candidate. She's running in House District 65A, and her name is Lena Buggs. And before we bring her on, though, Dallas is going to line up her video of which she announced her candidacy. So Dallas, if you could do that now.
I'm running under the Green Party ticket in hopes of restoring grassroots democracy back into the hands of the great people here in District 65A, more importantly in the great state of Minnesota. The constituents and voters are sick and tired of government waste, they're sick and tired of corporate loopholes, and they're tired of the socio and economic disparities here in our state. By representing them, I hope to close those disparities in those corporate loopholes and work to restore grassroots democracy into the hands of the people. I'm Lena Buggs, answering your call for action.
And that was her announcement of her candidacy for the Minnesota State House of Representatives, and I'm honored to say that she is in the studio right now, so I'd like to introduce you all to Lena Buggs. Lena, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's good to see you again, Tony.
Yeah,
how are you?
Good. Great to see you, and that was a great video you made there, and I got to tell everyone that the first time that we met was actually during the 2012 campaign cycle, and you and I were in a debate together. It was about the voter ID,
yes.
A proposed amendment for that. And, you know, when I met Lena, right away I knew she was somebody who truly believed in her convictions and the way that she spoke. She spoke with compassion and also with the authority and, you know, really with, I believe the right heart and with the people in mind. So I'm glad that you're here again. It's great to see you again. And I'll have to admit, too, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. When we were talking about the voter ID amendment, we went back and forth about some of the facts. And then, I also said, voter ID will pass on Election Day. And you said voter ID will not pass. And so I concede I was wrong about that. It ultimately did not pass, so I'll let you talk about that a little.
Well, as I indicated, it's great to see you again, Tony. I felt the same way about you. It was great that you had agreed. We had extended the invitation to a number of different candidates who were running for office that year. None of them accepted. You were gracious enough to come down and debate it. And ultimately, the good citizens of the state of Minnesota, and primarily in my District 65A, just voted no, and I think that was the right decision to make.
Well, one thing that I was really excited about, and I wish that we could do more of this, is, we had everyone get together at Morning Star Church on Selby Avenue in St. Paul,
yes.
And, getting people together for a meeting, and talking about the issues, becoming educated about them, and, everybody who attended there, I think, left knowing more about that particular issue and the impacts that it could or could not have. And, I believe that we need more of that type of activity and events for communities and people to take part in. And you said there's an event coming up that you're having, a town hall?
Yes, I'm having a town hall meeting in reference to closing the education disparities gap that we have in my district, and I would argue in the state of Minnesota. That's going to be coming up on February 27th, and it's going to be held at the Rondo Library from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Okay, so the town hall, it's February 27th at 6 o'clock p.m. at the Rondo
Library,
which is right on Dale and University.
Correct, yes.
That sounds like a great topic, closing the achievement gap. We had a guest on. He was actually one of the first guests that we've had on the show. His name was Danell Tenner, and he wrote a book about closing in the achievement gap nationally and some steps that people can take for that. But, I mean, that's an important issue because here in Minnesota, we have a great education system here for some, but then you look at the numbers in terms of the reading tests and mathematics tests and graduation rates, and you'll see a different picture when you look at the demographics of it. In particular, African American students, Hispanic American students, and many Hmong American students are being left behind in the dust in terms of the quality of education that they're receiving and the achievement. Can you talk a little more about why you think that is?
Well, I just think that we have to actually change the way that we look at education now. Urban school districts are disproportionately affected. You have 1 in 4 students who are receiving reduced price school lunches, and what that tells us is that there's a direct correlation between poverty and the inability to learn. So children can't be expected to come in and learn when they're hungry. Now, looking at the disparities that primarily between the students of color and white students, I think we have to actually change the curriculums and look at how children learn. The one-size-fits-all curriculum that we currently have now, it just simply isn't working. So what I hope to do, should I be elected, is to work with Superintendent Silva, who's the superintendent of the St. Paul Public Schools, and also the legislative body, to draft bills that are more conducive towards the way that children learn. I think that we put children on a pathway to college, and I think that we need to look at some other alternatives in terms of vocational job training program. And we also need to look at some other pathways that don't necessarily lead to college, but they lead to living wage jobs. Right now, I think that our students are ill-prepared right now to enter the job markets. So I think that we need to take a look at the way children learn, and I think there needs to be some modification of current curriculums. So I look forward to working with Superintendent Silva, as well as the relationships that I've formed at the state level. So, and there is support for that.
And you're a mother of 2. I saw met your 2 daughters here, and so can you explain a little more about the importance of the parental relationship with the school their child attends, and then also the involvement of the parents with the students? And does that have a predictable impact in terms of the future of those students?
Well, it does have a predictable impact. I think it's very important that parents are involved in their children's education. No longer can it be an acceptable practice that they come home from school and we expect them to do their homework without our involvement. Parent involvement is crucial to students' success. And I also think that parent involvement in terms of the relationship between the parents and not only the teachers, but the principals as well. We need to show our faces more at school, and we need to let the student body and the governing bodies know that we're interested in the success of our children. If we don't, you see it now with the disparities that are happening now with communities of color. There's typically one parent in the household who necessarily doesn't have the time because he or she may be working 2 jobs or 2 temporary jobs. But I think it's imperative for the success of our children that we are involved.
Yeah, so changing topics a little bit, last week were caucuses statewide in Minnesota, so the major parties had held their caucuses last Tuesday.
Yes.
You went to the precinct caucuses, I'm assuming, and can you talk a little more about the endorsement that you're seeking and why you chose the party that you did?
Sure. Our caucuses, the Green Party caucuses, were held Tuesday, as you know, and I'm seeking the Green Party endorsement because it's more in line with my beliefs in terms of grassroots democracy, equality for women, and just overall just putting politics back in the hands of the local level of people and getting them to participate through civic engagement and whatnot. I think the Green Party is able to actually operate in a bipartisan way in order to achieve things at the state legislature that were actually forgotten about. I initially got into this race because poor and working families weren't being represented.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with the candidates that have come out of the Green Party. We had City Council candidate Johnny Howard on a few months ago, and it was incredible to hear his perspective and also to learn about just the decades of community involvement that he had, and his message of really trying to get out there and representing the people. I know that resonated with Sam Wayne Pierce, who's a correspondent of our show, who we'll hear from later on, but he had nothing but great things to say about Johnny Howard, and it also opened his eyes to the Green Party. We live in a town, St. Paul, and basically the entire metro that's dominated by DFL or Democratic legislators. I don't think there's a single seat in Minneapolis or St. Paul that's held by a non-Democrat. And I'm interested to know a little more about why you chose to run Green Party, and also, where do you think the failings of Democrats are in terms of their leadership and representing the people?
Well, I initially chose the Green Party because for years I associated myself with the DFL.
Okay.
But the DFL, they weren't courting people of color, and they wouldn't endorse them. And it so happened I went to a Green Party meeting, and my concerns and my thoughts were validated. They were heard, and someone said, hey, you should run under the Green Party ticket. And that was the first time that I had initially been heard. When you go to the DFL caucuses, it's pretty much they have a facade of wanting to engage communities of color. And they may endorse maybe one or two candidates, and they have to be high-profile candidates, too. It just can't come from grassroots democracy. So I think that's where the DFL is failing, is that they are taking the vote from communities of color for granted. And that simply can't happen. Minnesota, and primarily my district, is a very diverse district, and we want to represent one Minnesota and one district for 65A.
So you're running in House District 65A. Can you talk a little more about just like the geography of the district, the boundaries of 65A as a district?
Sure. Well, District 65A encompasses portions of wards 5 and 4. So geographically, you're talking about portions of the West 7th neighborhood all the way to the Como neighborhood, and portions of the Front End neighborhood, as well as the East Side.
Okay.
So it's a big geographical area there that we're all responsible for.
Yeah, and what kind of campaign events do you have planned? Like, what are the major parades and community events that are going to go on?
Well, I will be appearing at Rondo Days, of course. That's pretty much a staple.
It's a great parade. I love that.
It's a wonderful parade. And then also at the Selby Jazz Fest. And then Hamlin Park typically has a parade. I appear at Ramsey County Parade as well, too. And at the Front End, there's also a March for Children's Education Parade, too, that I've been asked to participate in. But it's just a very diverse district. You have persons who ranging from the well-affluent to some of the poorest districts in the city of St. Paul.
Mm-hmm. So at your caucuses then, what were some of the issues that participants in your precinct caucus were bringing up?
Well, typically, I think the most important one, and one that I want to talk about a little bit, is living wages. Currently, the DFL is proposing a $9.50 hike for the minimum wage, and what we're saying in the Green Party is that that just isn't enough. $9.50 an hour just puts people just at 30% below the poverty level, and we're saying there needs to be a living wage of $15 per hour in order for a family to sustain itself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, and I was just going to say, so that's the primary issue that was brought up, in addition to single-payer health care. I think what we've seen with there's been some glitches towards Obamacare and that rollout.
That's an understatement.
And it's an understatement, but I was just exchanging basically pleasantries. But I mean, it hasn't really been successful in its rollout. And I think at the Green Party, we're advocating for single-payer health care as opposed to private insurance agencies and HMOs who are profiting off of it, and then they aren't, they're kind of stealing some monies that should be going back into the public sector, specifically for public health care. So that was brought up. And then also the legalization of marijuana for medicinal purposes, that was also brought up as well. So those were a few of the resolutions. And also a resolution for something that's near and dear to my heart is recycling and composting, and that's actually going to be a topic that's going to be taken up at the state legislature.
Yeah,
this
I heard
session.
something about that. There's some bills being proposed that would change the way that we're recycling here in Minnesota.
Exactly, and should I be elected, I have, and the Green Party is all in favor of curbside composting. And the Minnesota Pollution Agency found that a third of all waste was food waste. So instead of just throwing that away, it doesn't make sense not to put that towards reusable energy. So I would like to bring forth a bill that would introduce curbside composting. It was already a pilot program in the city of St. Paul, and it was proven to save the residents there. $1.60 per resident. So, I mean, it's a program that can work. Mayor Coleman right now, it's before Mayor Coleman and the St. Paul City Council right now. But I'd also like to introduce some legislation because recycling goals haven't been updated for 2 decades. Certainly the city of St. Paul and the state of Minnesota can do better than that, and we must do better than that. Also, I wanted to introduce should I be elected, introduce legislation pertaining to genetically modified organisms, or as we all know, GMOs. I think that there should be legislation around labeling of GMOs, primarily in grocery and retail outlets as well, too. I think that the Minnesotans, we deserve a choice in food intake and what we put into our bodies. And I think that with boosting recycling and composting goals, I think that that will definitely will leave a greener space for our children, and it'll create green jobs, and it'll stabilize the economy. It'll save the state millions, and it'll save the city of St. Paul millions as well too.
Okay, well let's go into a little more depth about some of the issues that you're talking about here.
Sure.
The first one I think we should talk about is marijuana legalization. You know, what they did in Colorado was sweeping and historic. It's not being proposed here in Minnesota yet anyways, but what they did in Colorado was they completely legalized marijuana for all purposes, medicinal and recreational, and I believe that that was decided through the ballot. The people of Colorado actually went out and voted on that. We had a gentleman, his name is Curtis Hanna. He was on our show. He's from Minnesota Normal, and he's an advocate for the legalization of medicinal marijuana. And just to expound a little more on that, are you for legalizing it across the board so that recreational use and possession would be legal in Minnesota, or are you talking more solely for medicinal purposes?
Well, I'm speaking solely for medicinal purposes. We really want to be careful about legalizing, and it is a drug, so we really want to be careful about legalizing a drug that can be harmful. But for medicinal purposes, it has been proven that marijuana is a viable substance, and it helps with glaucoma and some of those medical issues. So I'm for legalizing it, but I think that it should be put to a vote where the public can vote on it. And I think that's the constituents, specifically primarily in my district 65A, as well as the state. I think it should be a referendum where everyone should have a say in it and vote. And I think that's kind of part of what's missing at our state legislature.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There is a proposed piece of legislation now with the medicinal marijuana, and I've learned a little more about it, and I don't necessarily know if I agree with it or not, because what Curtis said is that, hey, it's a step in the right direction. It's not a perfect piece of legislation, but the part that I didn't really agree with is that it would only set up one distribution center, or one medicinal marijuana distribution center per county. There's 87 counties in Minnesota, so there'd only be one individual. In the bigger counties there might be 2 or 3, like Hennepin and Ramsey County, but in the greater Minnesota counties there'd only be one distribution center for medicinal marijuana. And I'm thinking in the back of my head that this is just another pathway towards more cronyism, where people who have political power can hand select who they want to basically become millionaires and owners of monopolies in each of these counties. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with that portion, but I bring that up because what you hear often from the political establishment here in Minnesota, especially the Democrats, is that they push a piece of legislation as one certain way. We heard when Governor Dayton ran for office, he said, tax the rich, we need to help the poor. And then he gets into office and he ends up subsidizing Ziggy Wolf's Vikings stadium with taxpayer money, and basically doing the opposite of what he campaigned on. And I wanted to know if you could expand a little more about how the political elite campaigns and versus how they actually practice their legislation once they're elected.
Well, it was really disappointed. I think the state.
'Cause you were against the stadium, weren't you?
Yes, I was in direct opposition to funding the stadium and giving corporate welfare to a billionaire. So, but Governor Dayton, as you indicated, he ran under the moniker of tax the rich and help the poor, and he did the exact opposite. This past legislative session, he cut $350 million towards health and human services.
Wow.
Which, so definitely people weren't happy about that. And what happens is that once you have the political elite and the more affluent, and he comes from the Dayton Corporation, who's well known here in Minnesota, but once you have the more affluent working, representing the needs of poor and working families and just working families in general, what happens is that they get negated, and that's how the special interest groups come in, and they're able to, in essence, buy campaigns or certain portions of legislation get put through. I mean, it was just deplorable how it was approved through backdoor meetings for Ziggy Wilf to get financing on that. And that was basically, corporate welfare. So let's call it what it is.
And they didn't even finish the job per se, because all yesterday I was reading reports that if you're a Vikings season ticket holder, you are now going to have to pay a licensing fee.
Exactly.
And these are going anywhere from $500 for the cheap seats to up to $10,000 for the 50-yard line rich people seats or whatnot. But I'm just watching this. I'm thinking to myself that we spending $1 billion on this Viking stadium, and nobody's going to be able to afford to actually go to the stadium, and it just seems completely backwards to me. And then meanwhile, the dome is sitting there now without the top. It's completely gutted, and they still don't know exactly how they're going to finance the remaining of this project. So we'll just have to...
Well, it just shows you how completely asinine that whole process is, to invest in a losing franchise as opposed to investing in the great people in the great state of Minnesota. That money could have been used, $1 billion we're talking about,
Right.
could have been used to help small businesses, job creations, more education. The state's budget has been mortgaged off of the backs of poor and working people in addition to the school systems. And so now we're operating allegedly in prosperity now. We have $825 million surplus. It's a no-brainer, Tony, that should go back into health and human services and job creation, and primarily, and also to support living wages.
And can you explain a little more now, because we're drawing the contrast about how things are currently in Minnesota and where we want them to be, and if and when you are elected, explain a little more about how you're going to get out there and engage the people, and also how are you going to not only push back against some of the corruption that's out there, but also to not be corrupted yourself.
Well, that's, you know me personally, and I represent and I work for the people of my district in 65A, and they're counting on me because the climate right now, we have a culture problem right now. We have a culture problem here in the state of Minnesota and in my district that says that the more affluent should prosper and that poor and working families shouldn't prosper. Now, should I be elected, I will definitely enact legislation that will help everybody in Minnesota get a fair shake. I want a fair economy for all. I've developed and established relationships at the state level with politicians who are bipartisan, who want to work with me to achieve this specific agenda.
And going back to the minimum wage too, because Sam and I, we're going to be talking about the minimum wage issue later on the show.
That's great
and
that this
bringing
conversation's
attention to
being
it.
had.
There are people, and I'll present more of the conservative, libertarian side of the minimum wages. People believe in the free market, and they believe in private enterprise, and ultimately that private enterprise should be the determiner of how much they should pay their employees. Now, the converse side of that is, we'll look at the economy that we're living in right now. There's a lack of jobs. Median incomes are going down.
Yes.
The rich are getting richer. Meanwhile, the poor are getting poorer, basically just staying where they
Stagnant.
are. People say, well, the minimum wage was never meant to be a living wage. How would you address that?
Well, You know that I'm not in support of minimum wages. I'm in support of living wages.
Okay, what's the difference there?
With minimum wage, I mean, the proposed bill now is $9.50, but a living wage allows a family to not only just survive, but to thrive and prosper. A living wage allows Minnesota families to participate in the economy through spending, through saving for education, being able to afford shelter, food, kind of the basic necessities that we all need. So that's a living wage. Minimum wage keeps you stagnant, it keeps you financially barren, and you're always trying to claw and scratch out of poverty. So minimum wage actually keeps you in poverty.
And what about the concern that some small businesses may have with increases in the livable wage? You know, if you say you own a snow plowing business, or say you own a daycare, or if you own, you know, what do people do in Minnesota? Landscaping businesses. You know, are they going to be subject to having to pay people that they hire $15 an hour too?
Well, I think it's just good business and a good moral code if we pay people a living wage. I think that it's a very legitimate question, and I also think that there needs to be some subsidies for those small businesses so that they are able to pay living wages. And I think part of the $825 million surplus should go to small businesses so that they're able to pay living wages.
So if you say subsidies, are you saying if you're a small business, say I have a landscaping business and I want to hire some high school students or some college students to work for me for the summertime, your subsidy would be then some type of a tax break? Is that what that means? Or
it would be a tax break, but I'll take it a step further, rather. It would also include government dollars set aside specifically to grow small businesses in my district and in the state of Minnesota, period. And I think by doing that, not only do you allow people to compete in the marketplace, I mean, it's the culture and the climate here in the state of Minnesota, and primarily in my district, says now that living wages, we can't afford to pay living wages. Well, I say we cannot afford to not enact living wages. I think that we've become indentured servants now. Between the poor and working families as opposed to the more affluent families. And we simply can't have that. I mean, who is going to be able to buy corporations' goods and services? We have got to change this perception of profit over people. And I think that we need to have people over profit. And I mean, you've got Walmart, who has a central location in my district, 65A on University there. And there were protests because Walmart is, their starting salary is $8.50 per hour full time. And a family of four can't make it off of $8.50 per hour. So but you know, Walmart generated billions of dollars in profit. So being able to do business in the state of Minnesota, it isn't a right, it's a privilege. So we have to require these corporations to pay fair and living wages. And they will still profit. I mean, we're not against free market. And just so that the listening audience knows, you know, we're not opposed to, we're happy when people are successful in business. I mean, that's what free market and American enterprise is, right? We're not opposed to that, but what we're opposed to is the greed and the wealth gap. So we're just saying we need to pay people just a living wage, and you will still profit. That way it's good for the economy. It'll stimulate the economy. People will buy more of your goods and services. And, you know, we also need to bring back manufacturing jobs here as well, too. But I plan to work with the small business community and the legislature to identify and recruit those manufacturing companies and recruit small businesses into the local areas there.
And we were talking about this issue when you first got here, too. And, you know, I mentioned my first real job I had was a caddy at one of the golf courses down the road here, and you know, I'd get there at 6 a.m. and I'd get home at about 4:00 p.m. You know, carry the bag around for 18 holes, and I think I'd made maybe $20 in that whole time, and you know, I was proud as ever to come home with that $20 bill. And then I talked about the job I had at the high school. I was a janitor one summer, and I got paid, I think the wage at that point was $4.55 an hour.
Yes.
And you said your first job, how much did you make at the first job you had?
Well, the first job I had, I was a vendor for the Minnesota Twins at the old Metrodome. This is way before it became Mall of America Field, so I'm dating myself here a tad bit. But at that point in time, the minimum wage was $3.35 per hour. And I came home, and I think my paychecks were, something probably like $40 or something like that on a biweekly basis. And it was just a different time period. You're talking about back when I was a teenager, back in the 80s in 1986, where there were, two-parent homes, single motherhood was just coming into the forefront. Well, fast forward 30 years, and so now we have the majority of households are headed by single-parent homes. So the children who are college students and high schoolers, if you pay them $15 per hour, they're able to help with the family's finances in the economics, because that single parent is basically breaking their back in order for them to secure housing and food and some of the basic necessities that we all need.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna bring up your website here if I can. We had a little
Excellent.
Technical problems before, but Dallas, if you can pop up the computer screen here. It looks like your website is Lena for FOR65A.com, Lena for 65A.com. And we definitely invite everyone watching this video to go to Lena's website. Looks like you have a pretty nice site here. You have links to, about you, learn more about you, about events that are coming up. You can find out more about the issues. And looks like there's also a donation tab, which campaigns are expensive.
They're extremely.
You need to get the name out there. You need to get your message out there. And really the only ways beyond the social media part is signs and literature. And are you planning on doing some door knocking this year?
Oh, definitely. I mean, with grassroots democracy, because I will not be taking any PAC money or any money from corporations. So it's going to solely depend on the great people of my district of 65A and other concerned citizens to help get me elected. It's basically going to be a ground game for us. We're going to be door knocking, shaking hands. You will also see me this legislative session. I will be sitting in on the House hearings as well as the Senate hearings, making sure that we hold our politicians accountable. And that's something that's been missing with Minnesota politics, is that we haven't been holding our politicians accountable. We've seen people who get elected who do the exact opposite of what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And then right now, I think that with the climate is such in Minnesota politics that we're operating reactionary right now instead of being proactive in our legislation. I mean, the disparities and the wealth gap between citizens of colors and white citizens is astronomical, but everyone wants a unified Minnesota. And that's what I'm looking to reinstitute. Is I understand, and I'm poised to work for the people of my district. I understand that I am a public servant, and I want to be held accountable by my constituents.
Mm-hmm. And Dallas, one more time, if you can pop up the website here, just so people know for sure how to get a hold of the campaign. Lena for 65A.com. And I highly encourage people to go on her website and check it out and look at her issues. And if you like Lena as a candidate, if you believe in what she stands for, get out there and help. We need more people out there, foot soldiers, people knocking on doors and passing out literature and educating the people on the issues. And I also think that there's a new, or the old law was reenacted about contribution. So correct me if I'm wrong, but somebody should be able to go on your website, Lena for 65A.com. They should be able to contribute $50, and then isn't there some sort of a refund program where they could get that $50 back or the rebate back? Are you familiar with that at all? Or?
Yes, I am, and that is accurate. I mean, if I can take contributions for this year up to $1,000, so if someone wanted to contribute to my campaign, they would definitely be eligible for that refund, and they would receive the tax information at the end of the year from my campaign.
Mm. Nice, yeah. And so I mean, you donate $50 or $100 for a couple, and essentially you get that money refunded. So
Exactly, and that's the way that it should be.
it is. It gets more people involved, and it gives more incentives to the local people to donate, which is absolutely crucial for these. And finally, I just want to remind everyone again, too, about the town hall meeting with Lena Buggs, and it's February 27th. It says 5:30 to 7 here. Is that right?
It's actually 6 p.m. to 7.
Okay, so February 27th from 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock, and that's at the Rondo Library, 461 Dale, right on Dale and University. It's a great library there.
It is, and I'm looking towards more civic engagement and community participation. So
Sounds good. Well, Lena Buggs, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I wish you the best in this upcoming year. It's going to be a busy one, and I hope you'll be able to do it.
thank you. Thanks for having me on your show, Tony.
Thank
Great to see
Lena.
you again.
Great to see you, too. So that's Lena Buggs, candidate for the Minnesota State House of Representatives and St. Paul's House District 65A. Again, that website is lena465a.com. Go out there, check it out. And like I said, the first time that I met Lena at the debate in 2012, I just knew that she was somebody special. She's somebody who has a fire, a passion for serving people. She's been a community organizer and activist for many years, and she's a mother of 2 beautiful daughters. And so we wish her the best and hope that she can make it up on the show again. And with that, we're going to tap into our East Coast correspondent, Mr. Sam Wayne Pierce, if we can get you lined up. And hopefully Sam can hear me. Sam, are you there?
Hello, Minnesota.
Woohoo! We got our technology back. It's been a while since I've been able to see your face on Skype. I think it's been 3 weeks now, so looking good.
With a face like this, you had to miss me.
How's the wedding planning going, Sam?
Pretty good, Tony. I appreciate when I get to talk to you about it since you went through it rather recently.
Oh yeah, it's there's some the day after the wedding, like when it's all done and you're married, it's one of the most joyful experiences you can possibly imagine. The wedding day was great too, but it's just like that the next day when you're finally married and you've done it all. It's like a feeling like none other. So, but Sam, we have a lot of topics to talk about here. But before we get into too many of them, were you able to listen to Lena Buggs and talk about her candidacy for the State House?
Of course, I listened in on it, and I went on the website previously. So, very good candidate, Tony. 2 things I want to point out. One, did you admit you were wrong when you predicted that the voter ID law would pass? Because Tony, you're the host of the show. You can't be wrong, can you?
Hey, come on! I'm man enough to admit when I'm wrong, and I was. I thought that voter ID was going to pass, and it didn't. There was a point of contention in the debate, and I concede. When you're wrong, you're wrong. So, but I do still think that we need laws in place that are able to ensure that the voting process is fair. And, whether that's a voter ID amendment or not is no longer the point of contention, but we need to ensure that everyone's vote counts equally. Would you agree with that, Sam?
Agreed 100%. I was just
Yeah, like I said, I was wrong. So
you mentioned when you were speaking to Ms. Buggs that Johnny Howard had been on and kind of opened certainly my eyes to the Green Party. I did want to point out that while he was an excellent candidate for St. Paul, it was way back in the year 2000, Tony. You and I were very young, emerging political scientists out at the University of Wisconsin, that it was Bush v. Gore.
Yep.
And really it was Bush v. Gore v. Nader.
That's
you and
right.
I personally walked down from our house to watch him speak. The man was dynamic. Regardless of your politics, you couldn't go listen to him speak and see the passion in his following. So from that, we were 20, 21 years old, I think then, and that stuck with me that we need third-party candidates. Ross Perot was important, but you and I were very young, I think, too young to really appreciate him. Ralph Nader was really the only one, unless you want to talk about Ron Paul's very passionate and kind of independent of the mainstream Republican Party following. So the Green Party now, on your show, Tony, you've had 2 great candidates. I think we need to take notice of them and listen to what they have to say. And I also think it's a challenge for the Democrats try and keep them down, to put it quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Sam. And I'm just pulling up this story right now since we're talking about the rise of new parties, whether it's the Green Party or in this case, this news just came out on February 6th, so last year. Dallas, if you can pop this up. This is pretty big news, actually. NPR reports, Tom Scheck, that Ron Paul Backer announces Minnesota U.S. Senate bid as the Independence Party candidate. So that's the gal right there. Her name is Hannah Nicolette, and she just recently announced to run for the U.S. Senate. She's seeking the Independence Party endorsement, and it's pretty telling in a couple different ways. She's younger. She's 39 years old. She got her start in politics as a teenager, volunteering for Ross Perot's presidential campaign in 1992. Since then, she's backed candidates representing the Independence Party, Libertarian Party, and Republican Party. But she emphasized she's not a big backer of the three. But here you have a Ron Paul supporter not seeking the Republican endorsement and announcing she's going to run for the U.S. Senate as the Independence candidate. That's big news, and it's going to stir up this entire race because she's going to take away a lot of votes depending on who the endorsed Republican candidate is for the U.S. Senate. But she's also going to take away votes from Senator Al Franken, too, the Democrats that aren't maybe necessarily in agreement with some of Senator Franken's stances, such as the centralized Obamacare, health care reform, or his gun grabbing that he's been on the record in supporting. And so a lot of Democrats may be supporting her, but I think even more Republicans are going to end up voting for her. And it could actually, who knows, she might win, or it could give Franken a victory. Because if you remember in 2010, Tom Horner, he ran as the Independence Party candidate for governor, and a lot of people said that he ran as kind of a moderate. He had a lot of backing from the Republican establishment, and people say that he took away a lot of votes from Tom Emmer, ultimately giving the victory to Governor Dayton. So that's pretty big news, though, don't you think, Sam? Ron Paul running for U.S. Senate in Minnesota?
It's great news. Two things I wanted to point out about her and her candidacy. When I was doing the research and reading a little bit of her bio before the show, Tony, she said that running as an independent was important to her because she is a fiscal conservative but socially liberal. I think that dynamic, those two things, I know that's how I would describe myself, and as I talk to people our age and or the millennials, the people that are 5 to 10 years younger than us, that's how I just see so many people identifying. I think that there are a lot of people, young voters, that just aren't going to vote Republican if the Republicans drag their feet on being anti-gay marriage and some of these really old school social issues. The Rick Santorums of the world come to mind that young people just don't identify with. But a fiscal conservative and socially liberal, I think a lot of young people do identify with.
Yeah, and I mean, there's still the fact, though, that we live in a major party split. At the end of the day, a lot of people, they just vote their party, and that's just the way that it is. And I don't know if it's going to change until there's a major event that sways people or really turns them off the establishment.
Tony, I think we're on the cusp. I think it's starting to happen. Young people are upset with this economy. The pajama boy ad that got so much humorous criticism. That's not young people. A lot of millennials were turned off by that. They don't want to be perceived as these 26-year-old wimpy guys wearing footsie pajamas, living in their parents' basement, drinking hot cocoa. They want jobs. They want success. And I think, but they're also socially liberal. So I think there's room for candidates like Ms. Nicolette and others that promise freedom. So freedom for everyone, socially liberal, but maybe less wasteful government spending.
Yeah, and I'd agree. And the tides are changing, and we are in the midst of that change. And the more people that get up and stand up and run and represent some of these other parties and other interests, the better. The more Lena Buggs that we have, the more Hannah Nicolettes that we have, the better, because then it gets more people engaged.
Yes.
It makes people feel like they actually have a choice. You know, like there might be some who are like, oh, the Republican and the Democrat, I don't want to vote for either of them. Oh, there's this candidate. This is who I'm going to vote for.
I wanted to say, I was going to disagree with your stance that she could cost the Republican an election, potentially. I was talking earlier about our time back at University of Wisconsin when we got to see Nader and Gore and all of these people come speak. I took a political science class, and I'll never forget, I had a wonderful professor, and she pointed out the myth in that thinking. Do you know that this was a class called Elections and Voting Behavior. From 1960 to 1988, every 4 years, presidential election, less and less and less people of those that were eligible to vote turned out. In 92, it spiked back up when Perot ran for the first time in decades. So when the Republicans whined that Perot cost Bush the election, the facts are that no, a lot of people turned out to vote for this refreshing new voice that wouldn't have voted for Bush. Same thing when the second Bush beat Gore and the Democrats whined that Nader cost Gore the election. No, the people that voted for Nader weren't going to just go vote for Gore because he was closest to what they wanted. There are people in this country that are passionate about these third parties, and they show up when they have a refreshing voice, and I hope we have more of them.
Yeah, I'd agree. And Minnesota has had our fair share. But Sam, did you watch the opening ceremonies last night for the U.S. Olympics?
A little bit, Tony. I'm more of a summer games kind of guy, but I watched a little bit. It was, I don't know. It's not like watching a football game, but I tuned in for a little while. Yeah,
one of the stories I wanted to bring up with you, and I'm gonna pull it up here now, that I thought was pretty interesting was Todd Ludwig. He was the American who carried the flag in the opening ceremonies, and there's a tradition, and I don't know how deep this tradition is, I was just reading about it, but that when various athletes with the flags pass by the leader of the country, they dip the flag to that particular individual. And there's a little known federal statute that prevents any Americans from dipping the flag. And I don't know how the actual statute is written, but I'm assuming you can't dip it to a foreign dignitary or basically to anyone, so that it keeps and holds the honor of the U.S. flag. And Dallas, if you can pop up this story, I have it right here, because it made some headway, whether or not Todd Ludwig was going to break the law at the opening ceremony. There he is right now. We're looking at it in Yahoo Sports by Martin Rogers. And so it turns out, anyways, that this guy did not dip the flag, and he followed the law. And you know what? I was really happy, actually, to see that. I was glad to see a respect for the law, whether it's an obscure law or not, or whether people think it's just a flag or not. It was just relieving to see that our flag would not be dipped to Vladimir Putin. What do you think, Sam?
Agree 100%. I'm glad that he abided by our law. I think it's a great law. I don't want to see our flag dipped to foreign dignitaries, especially old Vlad. Before we go on to, we have an important discussion that we're going to have on minimum wage, but before we do that, Tony, one Olympics-related item I wanted to talk about today. If the viewers of the show did not tune in, they missed a Bob Costas soliloquy, for lack of a better term, on Vlad. And I thought it was, first of all, he's already gotten some flack, even from the mainstream media, which I was surprised and happy to see that. But Bob Costas he gave this voiceover with pictures of Vlad, and he portrayed him, I think, as this elegant and thoughtful statesman. He even went as far as to specifically credit Vlad for getting into Syria and ensuring that the the Syrians did not have a U.S. airstrike against them last summer. anyone who was following the news, I think it was pretty abundantly clear that President Obama wasn't going to go into Syria. You might not like how President Obama handled it, but to make it look like Vlad came in as this hero, he also went on to say that Vlad was so instrumental in getting the Iranians to the negotiating table with the rest of the world for their nuclear, let's face it, nuclear weapons program. That couldn't be farther from the truth, Tony. The UN Security Council was trying to put in place really restrictive sanctions on Iran for many years, and it was the Russians under Vlad that dragged their feet on it. They made it harder for the world. The Iranians are closer to a nuclear weapon in large part because of the Russians' refusal to go along with the rest of the UN. So I thought Bob Costas' voiceover on Vlad was disgraceful. And if viewers of your show haven't seen it, I would highly recommend them to go YouTube it, listen to it, and make their mind. But
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out, Sam. And yeah, we're running out of time here, but we wanted to dedicate the last portion of the show. One of the issues that Lena Buggs is trumpeting is about livable wage, and she drew the distinction. I'd actually never really thought of it before between minimum wage and livable wage. I think that conservatives and Republicans and Lena agree at the core principle in that we all want to make more money. We all want to earn more, to save more, to invest more for our futures and for our children. I don't think anyone doubts that. I think where the debate is how exactly to get to that point. So first, can you comment on Lena's point between living wage and minimum wage? Do you see the difference there?
I thought she was extremely well spoken. She's clearly spent a lot of time researching this. She knew all of the facts and the numbers, and I did not the kind of research she's done, but a little bit of research for our show today, Tony. So in 2012, the government set the poverty level for a family of four at $23,000 gross annual income. One parent working minimum wage, if they're lucky enough to get a 40-hour-a-week job, we've seen what Obamacare has done to that, is going to make $8,000 a year less than that. If you have a couple small kids, how do both parents work 80 hours? That would be very difficult, but that's what you would need is two parents working 40 hours, 80 combined, to get above that poverty level. Another quick fact, according to U.S. Census Bureau in 2012, 16% of the people in this country live in poverty, under that poverty level. 20% of children, Tony. 1 in 5 kids in America lives in poverty. That's shameful.
One thing that I read quite often on this issue, and it's a contentious issue, because of the various things involved with it. But people say, well, hey, minimum wage or livable wage, nobody was ever meant to live off of flipping burgers at Burger King or McDonald's or whatnot. And to me, it just seems a little disingenuous to say something like that, because if you go to towns throughout the country here, the only place that they may be able to work is Walmart or the chicken shop or some other place. And so to put the blame on the person who's earning those wages, I think is totally disingenuous, and it's also insensitive, and they're not making any good points that are going to change people's minds, because I'm not a big fan of Walmart's business model. I do think that they took advantage of the relationships that they had with political leaders and with government and their relationship to China, and they basically priced out the entire market. Where you go into places in Mexico or South America, Walmart, where there's a Walmart, all other surrounding businesses are destroyed. They come in and they destroy the ma and pa hardware stores and little grocery stores and everything, because they drive the prices down so cheap that the consumer, they make the decision of buying the cheap hammer versus the expensive one that the hardware store is owning. So
and it's cheap junk that's manufactured in China or Indonesia or who knows where, because it's also put a lot of American manufacturing out of business, Tony. Mm-hmm. And that there's been an exodus in American manufacturing jobs for decades now. And then those people that by no fault of their own, that are stuck working at Walmart, are forced to buy the junk at Walmart. So they become part of the cycle. It's a bad problem, and in this country where we have so much and so much wealth, at the risk of sounding very liberal, I agree with Ms. Buggs. I think we certainly need to look at this. And Tony, if we can get ourselves closer to a living wage, then why not just at that point tie it into the CPI, Consumer Price Index for inflation, so that we don't have to keep having these conversations all the time?
There's two areas, though, that I would push back a little on you, Sam. The first one is I think we need to make a distinction of what businesses do, the distinction of exploitation of their workforce and the exploitation of the local economy versus a business that provides a job or an opportunity for somebody. You know, teenagers are a great example, and something that's used often with the wage debate is, you know, if you're a teenager, like, do you need to be making $15 an hour? You know, if you're, what if you're just doing a summer job or you have a part-time job? You know, I brought up the example when I was a janitor at my high school. I made $4.50 an hour, which was little money, you know, and then the government took out their withholdings too. So at the end of the day, I'd work 80 hours a week, and I think my checks were about $200 from that. But you know what? I learned a lot as a 15-year-old having that job. I don't think that I was exploited, and I got a paycheck at the end of the day. But then again, as a teenager, you don't have to, at least I didn't, have a family that I needed to take care of. And so that extra $200 and the experiences I got from that job were worth it. And so, you know, I just worry that if you put too much of a burden on some of the smaller businesses, that they're not going to hire certain types of employees, and teenagers it would probably be the biggest victim of that. What do you think about that, Sam?
So with everything that our Congress doesn't accomplish, don't you think they could come up with some sort of common sense set of rules and put into law that establish guidelines for teenagers and part-time work versus full-time employees?
Yep.
I think that's that's not a hurdle that we can't get over.
And you know, and I think that that's something that a lot of people would feel if it was addressed. I think you could build a bigger coalition of people to agree on that. And I think the other side of the coin too is with very small businesses. You know, for instance, say if we ever had a budget here at the Tony Hernandez Show, right? Say we had just a tiny amount of money that we could spend. You know, and perhaps we could hire a college intern or a college student. We could pay them, you know, $5 an hour to learn how, you know, to help set up the thing, learn the cameras, do a little bit of writing. You know, that's something that perhaps we could maybe afford. But if we had strict laws in place where we had to pay somebody $15 an hour, that might prevent us from doing it altogether. And so I think that, you know, looking at the size of the business or the organization is something also. Like Walmart, absolutely, they should be providing livable wages for their employees. Yeah. The guy who owns a landscaping business that needs, you know, somebody to dig a hole every once in a while, you know, maybe there should be some leeway there and some exceptions as well. But, you know, Lena talked about that. She talked about how she was willing to bring all interests together and balance them. And, you know, it's really when you have the collision of ideas, as long as they're founded on the same principle, you know, as I stated, I think all of us agree we all should be making more. We should be making more money. We should be saving more and able to put more money away for the future. And I think with that we can agree. And then the debate is, how do we get there, and how do we draft something that's crafted so it can go around some of the hurdles and not just be a one-size-fits-all type of legislation, such as the Affordable Care Act, which, you know, doesn't work in healthcare. The one-size-fits-all doesn't work, and, you know, this might be an example too.
So, well, Tony, I guess, and I know we're almost out of time, but if you and I and a guest like like Ms. Buggs can have a thoughtful conversation. The fact that our Congress can't is just shameful.
I agree, Sam, and that's the end of our show here, and I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. We broadcast live every Saturday from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock on SCC Television Studios in White Bear Lake. We also replay on SPNN and our YouTube channel, Tony Hernandez MN. May God bless you, may God bless America, and vaya con Dios.